If there's one thing the Wisconsin result taught us last night, it's that money talks. And you bet your bottom dollar Mitt Romney knows it. Today, the presumed Republican nominee is down in the Lone Star State for fundraisers in San Antonio and Houston. A two-day swing that's expected to put some $15 million into Mitt's saddlebags. That's enough to make even J.R. Ewing tip his hat. And we all know they make them bigger in Texas, a fact that seemed to astound Mr. Romney in Fort Worth.
I met a guy yesterday, 7 feet tall. Yeah, handsome, great big guy, 7 feet tall. Name is Rick Miller. He started a business. Of course, you know, it was in basketball. But it wasn't in basketball. I mean, I figured he had to be in sport, but he wasn't in sport.
Sport? That's what I'm supposed to say. And while folks 7 feet and shorter dole out 10 large for a photo with Mitt, there are a couple of Texans who can't be found in any Romney photo anywhere. For one, the man who called Romney a vulture capitalist and rampant purveyor of the pink slip, Texas Governor Rick Perry. Yes, and that would be George W. Bush, he of the elevator endorsement, and the guy Romney did his best to defend on the former president's home turf.
President George W. Bush was at the White House for the unveiling of his painting last week, and that was he's always an easy target, and so he's blamed. Although after 3.5 years, people have figured out this is Obama's economy, not George Bush's economy.
OK, that's their story, and they're sticking to it. Except, wait a second. If Romney blames our economic difficulties squarely on the president, that must mean that the Romney campaign takes full responsibility for the governor's appalling record of job creation in Massachusetts, coming 47th out of 50 states, right?
They're bringing down the gains of his fourth year in office, which shows the real impact of his policies, and diluting it with the first year in office when he came into office, and it was 50th in job creation. He inherited a $3 billion projected deficit.
When Mitt Romney arrived, Massachusetts was an economic basket house. If you throw D.C. into the mix, we were 51 out of 51.
Using one number, this odd average of the 4 years, to come up with 47th in the nation doesn't really show what happened.
Right. So you only start the clock on day one when it's President Obama in the midst of an economic freefall. When it's Mitt Romney, it starts when you like. Or as the legend Kenny Rogers sang, know when to walk away, know when to run. Let's bring in our panel now. In Washington, Democratic strategist Julian Epstein of the Law Media Group, and MSNBC political analyst, former DNC communications Karen Finney, who's now a columnist for The Hill. And here with me in New York, Republican strategist Ron Christie, former special assistant to former President George W. Bush. Karen, isn't it time to give Republicans some real credit here? They realize they have a mediocre candidate, a man who has few core convictions, changes his position more times than a tornado, but they will shore him up by literally throwing money at him.
Absolutely. Throw money at the problem. That is the GOP way, Martin. I mean, he's doing quite well in Texas today, fundraising. And as you pointed out, why let any of those pesky questions get in the way and have, Rick Perry there and have to answer questions about what did you mean by vulture capitalism, and not having, former President George Bush and having to answer pesky questions about, I don't know, the fact that George Bush left Barack Obama with a mess. But that doesn't seem to matter when we're talking about Obama, yet the fact that Romney thinks he was left a mess by a Republican governor, that matters. So, sure, just throw money at the problem.
Ron, we're hearing that the San Antonio luncheon, which Romney was at, has raised between $3 and $3.5 million, one lunch. Do you now accept that it's not the president who's going to be the billion-dollar candidate? It's going to be Mitt Romney, whose super PAC money will literally be about double some African nation's GDP, won't it?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know.
Well, it will be.
Well, I don't know. We'll have to see. I hope he fundraises very well. I hope he raises.
Well, he's doing incredibly. Lunch, $3.5 million.
Well, you want to jump on Romney? Why don't we jump on President Obama?
Well, because I'm asking you about Romney,
and I'm saying he's got 3 fundraisers.
No, but here's the question I'm asking you, Ron. Here's the question I'm asking you.
Both ways.
No, sure. I just want to ask you. I just want to ask you this question.
Ron, if the president is able to raise millions of dollars today, Romney can do the same.
Okay, but here's the question I'm asking you, which is this. Everyone previously talked about the president being the billion-dollar candidate. Is it not true now that it's going to be Mitt Romney who's going to have most of the money? He's going
to no. I think
the super PACs, his individual amounts of money.
I think that President Obama and Mitt Romney will have a relatively equal amount of money to spend together. I think relatively equal.
Okay, hold it there. Karen, do you agree with that?
No, of course I don't agree with that. And Ron, come on, don't be ridiculous. Look, let's be very clear. The kind of money that we're talking about, the outside money from super PACs, that is different than the kind of money that a campaign and a political campaign can raise and spend. Because remember, there are limits on how that money is raised, and there are limits on how that money is spent. Super PACs, basically, you can write very large checks. You have a lot more anonymity by the people who write those big checks, and they can spend it on a lot more things in terms of meaning.
Karen, please.
Hold on, Ron,
your
influencing the vote.
No, wait a second. Your purity here is so insincere. Oh, it's those Republican super PACs. Well, Karen Finney, what about the unions and the millions of dollars that unions are now able to spend? This gusher of money is the same
unions, Ron, if you
thing.
want to check your law books, actually have a different level of reporting than the super PACs do. But I am more than happy to have that conversation.
Okay, as am I, but only to suggest that the unions aren't doing it and the Democrats aren't raising
it.
It's disingenuous.
That's not what she said. Julian, let's be honest. Romney has been bought, hasn't he? I mean, he doesn't have any economic policies. He leans on the Paul Ryan budget. He doesn't have any specific foreign policies. He leans on George Bush's advisors, one of whose is with me today. Isn't he just a mouthpiece for big money?
Well, first, I think there's no question Republicans will have a money advantage, I think, particularly when you include the super PACs. Secondly, it is unclear what all of that special interest money is buying. You know, we can have debates all day long about whether Massachusetts was 47th or 30th. What I'm more interested in is that Romney doesn't have an economic plan moving forward.
Yes, he does, Julian. It's Paul Ryan's budget. That's his economic plan.
Whereas we've discussed before, the numbers don't add up. Look, we're at 15% GDP right now in terms of our taxes. We're at historic lows right now in terms of regulation. If we had a productivity crisis in the country, then somebody could possibly make an argument that taxes should even go lower than they are now. But Romney's plan is nothing but empty aphorisms about cutting regulation and cutting taxes when these two things are at the lowest by historic measures.
And the thing
so it's totally unclear where Romney wants to take this country. I think it's clear where Obama wants to take the country. What I'm more interested in is the contrast to the future. I have a very clear idea what Obama wants to do, but Romney, you couldn't figure out if you were a fortune teller.
The fortune teller, Julian, the fact of the matter is the President of the United States has no budget. The President of the United States has trillion-dollar deficits for the next 10 years. So you guys can criticize Paul Ryan. You can criticize the Republicans. The Senate has not produced a budget in over 3 years. The Democrats aren't serious about fiscal responsibility.
You know what, Ron? These are silly points. Because let me tell you why. These budget points.
Let me say this. If it's silly, Julian, then why hasn't the Senate produced a budget in 3 years? How is that silly?
So let me explain that to you. Because the budgets are never paid attention to anyway. What matters are appropriations bills, which the Senate has done. As for the deficit, when you're President Bush came into office, we had a projected $6 trillion surplus. He left us with an $11 trillion debt. It's true that Obama has added a little bit to it, the way most economists thought we should, because we were in a recession. And we've come from, losing 800,000 jobs a month, Ron, to gaining about 200,000 on average. Negative 9% growth to positive 2% growth.
Funny, Martin. It's always, I have to wait for them, but you cut me off.
No, please.
You interrupt us too, Ron.
I would say to you, Julian.
Ron, it's just courtesy that when he's speaking, we want to hear him.
Well, the courtesy would be nice to be shown to me as well.
It is being extended to you even as I speak.
Even as we speak. But what I would say to you, Julian, you know what darn well, you're a lawyer. The Congressional Budget Act of 1974 stipulates that by law, the House and the Senate must produce a budget. So this isn't some trivial thing that, no one pays any attention to that. It's the law. The second thing I would say to you is that when President Bush left office, we had a projected budget of $161 billion. Now President Obama has a projected deficit of $1.1 trillion a year for the next 10 years. So if you want to talk about how bad the Bush years are, I would say to you, this president who said he was going to cut the budget deficit in half has failed in that
I think we could have a more intelligent conversation, honestly, if we stop the if we get out of the weeds and we talk about what the future is. Obama has laid a very clear plan out in terms of rebuilding the country. The efforts of getting the government actively involved has taken us from the worst recession to pretty good results. We're not where we need to be. What is Romney's plan other than cutting taxes beyond what they are at 15% of GDP right now and in terms of cutting regulation? There is no plan. There is no vision.
Karen?
Yeah, can I offer to Julian's question? Let me offer this observation. If we assume that Mitt Romney will apply the values from when he was a corporate raider, and the values and the record from when he was governor of governor of Massachusetts, got Wisconsin on the brain, where, for example, he did a capital gains tax cut, which benefited the top 300 wealthiest families in the state and hurt the middle class. So I think Julian, we do have a sense of where he would go, because the Romney-Ryan budget plan actually is consistent with what we've seen Romney's plan pattern to have been, in terms of things that, this idea that it's going to all trickle down when it doesn't, not the kind of sensitivity about why we need the social safety net programs and why we need to, stimulate growth at the level of the middle class.
Karen Finney, Julian Epstein and Ron Christie, thank you all for your considered contributions. I hope you feel you ventilated them.